I'm Emma Clark, 28 years old, and until last month, I thought my parents loved me unconditionally. Then I overheard them at their anniversary party, wine glasses in hand, confessing to friends they regretted having me. If we hadn't had Emma, our lives would have been so different, Dad sighed, while Mom nodded in agreement. My world imploded silently. I didn't confront them or cause a scene. I just packed my things when they weren't looking and left. But I deliberately left my childhood diary behind. Before I share what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to join me on this emotional journey. For as long as I could remember, I'd been the dedicated daughter, the one who shaped her entire life around making Robert and Linda Clark proud. My childhood home in suburban Connecticut was picture-perfect from the outside. White picket fence, neatly trimmed hedges, and family photos lining every wall. I grew up believing we were the ideal American family, the kind you'd see in those cheesy holiday commercials where everyone gathers around a perfectly roasted turkey while soft music plays in the background. Dad was a respected accountant at a local firm, and Mom taught third grade at the elementary school just 3 blocks away. They attended every school event, clapped the loudest at my piano recitals, and seemed genuinely invested in my happiness. At least that's what I thought for nearly 3 decades of my life. My relationship with them felt solid, built on mutual respect and love. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, the pride on their faces seemed unmistakable. They hugged me tightly after my speech, Dad whispering, "You've made us so proud, Emma." Those words became my compass, guiding every major decision I made afterward. I chose nursing because Mom once mentioned how noble the profession was, even though my high school art teacher, Mrs. Winters, had pulled me aside senior year with life-changing news. "Emma, you've been offered a full scholarship to Rhode Island School of Design. This is an incredible opportunity." The acceptance letter had arrived while my parents were at work, and I'd stared at it for hours, tracing the embossed logo with my fingers, imagining a life surrounded by canvases and creativity. But when I brought it up at dinner, Dad's expression had changed almost imperceptibly. "Art is a wonderful hobby, Emma, but it's not a stable career. We just want security for you." Mom had reached across the table, patting my hand. "Nursing would use your compassion. You've always been such a caring girl." So I declined the scholarship and enrolled in nursing school instead. The acceptance letter went into my diary, pressed between pages documenting my sacrifice, along with a pressed daisy from Mrs. Winters' goodbye bouquet. She'd looked heartbroken when I told her my decision. I excelled at nursing school, throwing myself into anatomy classes and clinical rotations with determination, if not passion. After graduation, I could have taken a position at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, an opportunity my classmates envied, but my parents mentioned how empty the house would feel without me. So I moved back home and took a job at the local children's hospital. For 6 years, I built my career as a pediatric nurse, finding genuine joy in helping my young patients despite the path not being my first choice. I maintained a small corner in my bedroom for painting, creating watercolors during rare free time between hospital shifts. My best friend Tara couldn't understand my choices. "Emma, you're 28, still living with your parents, and working at a hospital 10 minutes from your childhood home," she'd said during our coffee date last spring. "When are you going to live for yourself?" I'd stirred my latte, watching the cinnamon swirl into patterns. "They've given me everything. Is it so wrong to want to be there for them?" Tara had given me that look, the one that mixed pity with frustration. There's a difference between being there for someone and sacrificing your entire life for them. I'd changed the subject. My brother Michael hadn't made the same choices. He'd moved to Germany right after college, pursuing his engineering career with single-minded focus. He called on holidays and sent exotic gifts but rarely visited. Mom and Dad never complained, but I'd noticed how Mom lingered over his occasional postcards, how Dad casually mentioned Michael's accomplishments to neighbors. I compensated for Michael's absence by being ever present, handling their tax paperwork, driving Mom to doctor's appointments, helping Dad maintain the yard. When their 30th anniversary approached, I dove into planning with characteristic thoroughness. I coordinated with their friends for a surprise backyard celebration, ordered a custom cake recreating their wedding design, and spent weeks secretly planning the perfect gift. A family trip to Italy, the destination they'd always dreamed of visiting. I'd been saving for 3 years, picking up extra shifts and cutting corners in my personal expenses. The envelope with 3 tickets, I'd even convinced Michael to join us, was wrapped and hidden in my closet, ready to be presented at the perfect moment. In the weeks leading up to the party, I transformed our backyard into an elegant venue, stringing fairy lights through the old oak trees, arranging rented tables with fresh flower centerpieces, and hanging photos chronicling their 30 years together. I wanted everything to be perfect, a testament to the family bond I valued above all else. The night before the party, I stayed up until 3 in the morning, finalizing seating arrangements and confirming details with the caterer. As I finally crawled into bed, exhausted but satisfied, I wrote in my diary, "Tomorrow will be perfect. They deserve nothing less after everything they've done for me. I can't wait to see their faces when they open the Italy tickets. Maybe this will finally be enough." Little did I know that in less than 24 hours, that entry would seem like it was written by a different person entirely, a naive woman who still believed she was the beloved daughter in a happy family narrative, rather than someone's biggest regret. The day of the anniversary party arrived with perfect early summer weather, sunshine filtering through the maple trees in our backyard, creating dappled patterns on the pristine white tablecloths. Guests began arriving at 4 o'clock, bearing gifts wrapped in silver paper and sharing stories about Robert and Linda's early days together. I flitted between the kitchen and yard, checking on the catering, refreshing drink pitchers, and ensuring everyone had what they needed. Mom looked radiant in her blue dress, her silver-streaked hair styled elegantly, while Dad stood tall in his best suit, greeting old friends with hearty handshakes. Around 6, just as the golden hour cast everything in warm light, I clinked a spoon against my glass and proposed a toast. "To 30 years of showing the rest of us what love looks like," I said, raising my champagne flute toward my parents. "May we all be fortunate enough to build what you have." Everyone applauded as my parents shared a kiss, and for that moment, surrounded by people who loved them, they looked genuinely happy. After dinner, while guests mingled and enjoyed dessert, I headed to the kitchen to prepare the anniversary cake for its grand presentation. Through the window, I could see my parents sitting with their closest friends, the Harrisons and the Bakers, in our garden gazebo. They were laughing, glasses of expensive whiskey in hand, the kind Dad saved for special occasions. I was about to turn away when I heard my name, causing me to pause mid-motion. "Emma's a wonderful daughter," Mrs. Harrison was saying. "You two are so lucky she stayed local. Our kids scattered across the country the minute they graduated." There was a pause, and then my father's voice, loosened perhaps by the whiskey, and the nostalgia of the evening responded in a tone I'd never heard before. "Sometimes I wonder about that. Having Emma derailed everything, if I'm honest. If we hadn't had her when we did, we could have taken those positions in California. Linda could have finished her PhD. My hands froze on the cake box as Mom's voice drifted clearly through the open window. "Remember that offer from the international school in Switzerland? We were packed and ready to go when I found out I was pregnant." She sighed, a sound so wistful it made my stomach clench. "Sometimes I wonder what our lives would have been like. I hate to say it, but there are days I regret it too." The cake box slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, crashing to the kitchen floor in a mess of frosting and shattered porcelain. I barely noticed, my ears ringing with the casual cruelty of their words. Mr. Baker's uncomfortable laugh cut through the moment. "Come now, you don't mean that. Emma's a lovely girl." "Of course she is," Dad replied quickly. We love her dearly, but you can love someone and still recognize they changed your trajectory. We had such different plans before she came along," Mom added softly. We were so young, 24. We had the world at our fingertips, and suddenly we were tied to a mortgage in Connecticut, building the stable life a child needs. My vision blurred as hot tears spilled down my cheeks. I stood, frozen, unable to move away from the window, subjecting myself to more painful revelations as the conversation continued. "And then when Michael came along, it was too late to change course," Dad continued. "Though at least he's living the adventurous life somewhere." "That's why we never pushed Emma to move out," Mom explained. "It felt wrong somehow, after everything, to push her away when she wanted to stay close. The terrible irony of it crashed over me. I'd stayed for them, thinking they wanted me close, while they'd allowed me to stay out of guilt, perhaps resenting my presence all along. Every sacrifice I'd made, every alternative path abandoned, had been to please parents who saw me as the human embodiment of their derailed dreams. I stumbled back from the window, barely making it to the bathroom before violent sobs overtook me. Memories flooded back, recontextualizing themselves with brutal clarity. Mom's tight smile when I announced I'd declined the Boston position to stay local. Dad's distracted nod when I mentioned giving up my art scholarship. The way they enthusiastically supported Michael's move abroad while encouraging me to remain in our hometown. All these years, I'd interpreted their behavior as appreciation for my presence when perhaps it had been resignation, or worse, obligation. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, mascara streaming down my flushed cheeks, and saw a stranger looking back. Who was I beyond being Robert and Linda's dutiful daughter? What parts of me had I silenced to maintain their approval? And how could I continue living in their house, eating meals across from them, knowing I represented their biggest life regret? When I finally emerged from the bathroom, face washed and composure tentatively restored, the party continued around me. I moved through the remaining hours mechanically, serving cake I had hastily salvaged, accepting compliments for my planning, and smiling until my cheeks ached. Mom and Dad remained oblivious to my internal collapse, accepting congratulations and reminiscing about their 3 decades together. As the last guest departed around midnight, Mom hugged me tightly. "Everything was beautiful, Emma. Thank you for all your hard work." I hugged her back stiffly, wondering if she could feel how something fundamental had shifted between us. "You deserve it," I replied, the words sticking in my throat as I realized the Italy tickets would remain forever in my closet, an emblem of devotion to a family dynamic that had never truly existed. That night, I wrote in my diary until dawn broke, pouring out decades of suppressed feelings, documenting the terrible revelation that had shattered my understanding of my place in my family. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I had given up everything to be the perfect daughter to parents who had given up everything because of me, and neither of us had ended up happy. The week following the anniversary party unfolded in a strange, detached haze. I moved through our house like a ghost, performing the routines that had structured my life for 28 years, while feeling completely disconnected from them. Dad left for work each morning with his usual thermos of coffee that I prepared. Mom continued grading papers at the kitchen table in the evenings. We ate meals together, discussed neighborhood news, and maintained the appearance of normalcy while the truth hovered unspoken between us. I searched their faces constantly, looking for signs that I had misheard or misinterpreted that devastating conversation. Instead, I found only more evidence supporting what they'd revealed. On Tuesday morning, Dad flipped through a travel magazine at breakfast, pausing at a spread about Bali. "Jim Harrison is taking early retirement next year," he commented, not looking up from the glossy photos of pristine beaches. "He and Carol are spending 6 months traveling through Southeast Asia." His voice carried a note of unmistakable envy. "Must be nice to have that freedom at their age." I stirred my oatmeal silently, hearing the unspoken addition, the freedom they would have had without me. That evening, Mom mentioned her college roommate's recent promotion to university dean. She was always brilliant, Mom said, a faraway look in her eyes. We were both accepted to the doctoral program, you know. Life takes such different turns. Her smile looked brittle as she patted my hand. But we all make our choices. By Thursday, I couldn't bear it any longer. During my lunch break at the hospital, I called a real estate agent and arranged to view apartments that evening. The agent, Diane, showed me a small one-bedroom unit in a renovated Victorian house across town, walking distance to the hospital, and, more importantly, 15 minutes from my parents' home. The apartment was nothing special: cream-colored walls, standard appliances, and windows overlooking a modest courtyard. But as I stood in the empty living room, I felt something crack open inside me, a tiny fissure of possibility. "I'll take it," I told Diane, surprising both of us with my decisiveness. I signed the lease that night, arranging to move in the following week. I told no one, not even Tara. This decision was mine alone, perhaps the first truly independent choice I'd made in years. At home, I began the process of subtle separation. Each day, I selected a few personal items, things that wouldn't be immediately missed, and packed them in my nursing tote. Photo albums, my favorite books, the small collection of watercolor paintings I'd kept hidden in my closet. During shifts at the hospital, I ordered essentials for the new apartment, arranging for deliveries after my move date. In quiet moments between patient rounds, I researched art classes at the community center near my new place. The Connecticut Museum of Art was hiring part-time docents, and I found myself filling out an application during my break, a small act of reclamation that made my heart race with both anxiety and anticipation. My diary became my sole confidant, the only place where I could express the complex storm of emotions I was experiencing. Each night, I documented my preparations, my fears, and increasingly, my hope for a life reclaimed. "I wonder who I might have been if I'd chosen differently," I wrote one evening, and more importantly, who I might still become. On Sunday night, Dad called me into his home office to help with some paperwork. As I organized the folders on his desk, he leaned back, in his leather chair, gazing at a framed photo of him and Mom in their 20s, backpacking through Yellowstone. "Life is strange, Emma," he said, his voice contemplative. "You start out thinking you'll do all these grand things, have all these adventures. Then reality sets in." He looked at me, not unkindly, but with a certain resignation that cut deeper than anger could have. The responsible path isn't always the exciting one, is it? In that moment, I realized he wasn't just talking about himself. He was warning me, in his way, preparing me for the same gradual surrender to obligation that had defined his life. The understanding horrified me. He couldn't even imagine that I might still have choices, might still create a life of purpose and passion. To him, at 28, my course was already set, just as his had been. The next morning, I overheard my parents discussing their empty nester friends, the Nelsons, who had recently sold their suburban home and purchased a condo in Florida. "They seem 10 years younger," Mom remarked. "Janice said it's peaceful. Having the place to themselves, being able to come and go as they please." Dad hummed in agreement. "Something to look forward to, I suppose." Mom laughed softly. "One day the house will be quiet. We can turn Emma's room into that studio you've always wanted." They weren't being intentionally cruel. They didn't know I was listening from the hallway, my hand pressed against my mouth to silence my breathing. They were simply voicing thoughts they assumed were private, revealing the truth they kept carefully hidden when I was present. My continued presence in their home was something they were patiently enduring, not cherishing. That night, I made my final decision. I retrieved the storage boxes from the attic while my parents were at their weekly bridge game, searching through my childhood mementos with new perspective. I found construction paper cards I'd made in elementary school. "World's best mom" and "number one dad" decorated with glitter and childish drawings. Academic awards I'd earned, desperately seeking their approval. Participation trophies from soccer, a sport I'd hated but continued because Dad coached the team. At the bottom of the last box, I found it. The official letter from Rhode Island, School of Design, offering the full scholarship I'd declined. Attached was a personal note from Mrs. Winters. Emma, your talent is a gift that deserves to be nurtured. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime. Whatever you decide, never stop. Creating beauty in this world. I clutched the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face, mourning the alternate life I'd surrendered without fully understanding the cost. As dawn broke the next morning, I packed my remaining essentials into 2 suitcases. I wrote one final entry in my diary, the most honest words I'd ever committed to its pages, laying bare the revelations, the pain, and my tentative hope for healing in separation. With deliberate care, I left the diary on my perfectly made bed, alongside the envelope containing the Italy tickets I'd never give them. The house was silent as I carried my bags to the car. My parents wouldn't wake for another hour, wouldn't discover my absence until they found my childhood bedroom emptied of personal belongings, the diary left as my only explanation. As I pulled out of the driveway, watching the house recede in my rearview mirror, I felt a complex mixture of heartbreak and liberation. For the first time in my life, I was choosing my own path, even if I was terrified of where it might lead. The evening before my silent departure, I found myself drawn to the attic storage space where boxes of my childhood memorabilia had been carefully preserved. My parents were attending their monthly dinner with college friends, giving me several uninterrupted hours to confront the physical evidence of my history with them. The attic air was thick with dust and nostalgia as I switched on the single bare bulb, illuminating stacks of cardboard boxes labeled in Mom's neat handwriting. Emma, elementary school. Emma, middle school. Emma, high school. With trembling hands, I peeled back the yellowed tape on the first box, revealing layers of my past carefully archived. Inside were report cards boasting straight A's, each one bearing proud teacher comments. Emma is a model student. Emma shows exceptional promise. Emma goes above and beyond expectations. Between the academic accolades were construction paper creations, Mother's Day cards decorated with excessive glitter, Father's Day bookmarks featuring wobbly handwriting proclaiming, "I love you to the moon and back." I traced my childish handwriting with my fingertip, remembering how desperately I'd wanted these simple offerings to be enough, to be worthy of their love. Deeper in the box, I discovered a 4th grade essay titled My Heroes, featuring crayon illustrations of my parents. I'd written, "When I grow up, I want to make my mom and dad as proud of me as I am of them. They gave up a lot to give me a good life, and someday I'm going to make it all worth it." The innocent words hit me with physical force, evidence that, even as a child, I'd somehow absorbed the narrative that my existence had required their sacrifice. Moving to the high school box, I unearthed more painful artifacts. The art portfolio Mrs. Winters had helped me compile, filled with watercolors and charcoal sketches she'd called exceptionally promising. Between the artwork was the formal letter from Rhode Island School of Design that had arrived during my senior year, offering not just admission, but a full scholarship based on my portfolio submission. Paper-clipped to it was a handwritten note from Mrs. Winters that I hadn't noticed when I first received it. "Emma, I've taught for 27 years, and I've recommended only 3 students for this scholarship. Your talent isn't just technical, skill. It's a unique perspective that deserves cultivation. Please consider this path carefully. Whatever choice you make, promise me you won't stop creating." I'd broken that promise for years, reducing my art to an occasional hobby squeezed between hospital shifts and family obligations. Beneath the portfolio was my nursing school acceptance letter, which my parents had framed and displayed prominently in the living room for years. The contrast between their reactions to these 2 achievements couldn't have been clearer. The Final box contained mementos from my college graduation. The program listing me as nursing school valedictorian, photos of me in cap and gown flanked by beaming parents, and the journal they'd given me as a graduation gift, inscribed, "To record." The beginning of your adult journey. The irony wasn't lost on me that this journal had evolved into the diary where I documented years of suppressed desires and quiet surrenders, culminating in the revelation that had shattered my world. As I carefully replaced these artifacts of my curated life, a nursery school art project caught my attention. It was a simple family portrait rendered in finger paint, stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, and me, all holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. My 5-year-old self had added a fourth figure off to the side, explaining to my confused teacher that I was saving space for my future brother or sister. Even then, I'd sensed something was missing in our family unit, some vital connection or joy that additional children might bring. Michael's birth 3 years later had completed the family picture, but created new dynamics I was only now beginning to understand. By the time I descended from the attic, arms laden with select items I couldn't bear to leave behind, my resolution had crystallized. I couldn't continue living as the physical embodiment of my parents' compromised dreams. Each day in their presence reinforced the narrative that my very existence had derailed their lives. The subtle resentment I now recognized in their offhand comments and wistful reminiscences was slowly poisoning whatever genuine love existed between us. The next morning, my parents left for work with our usual routine intact, Dad accepting. The travel mug of coffee I prepared, Mom reminding me we needed milk from the store, neither noticing anything amiss in my carefully composed expression. The moment they pulled from the driveway, I moved with purposeful efficiency, transferring my carefully packed bags to my car and making one final sweep of my bedroom to ensure I'd left nothing essential behind. The room looked eerily untouched. Bed perfectly made with the floral comforter I'd had since high school, bookshelves arranged by author, nursing credentials framed on the wall. Only the missing photographs and personal items hinted at my impending absence. I placed my diary deliberately in the center of the bed, its worn leather cover containing years of my most private thoughts, fears, and now, my explanation for leaving. Beside it, I placed the envelope containing the Italy tickets I'd purchased for their anniversary gift, tickets that would never be used. My final entry filled several pages, beginning with the devastating conversation I'd overheard and working backward through years of sacrifices I'd made, seeking approval I now understood might never have been fully available. I wrote about the art scholarship declined, the Boston position rejected, the apartment offers from friends turned down, all to remain the dutiful daughter to parents who might have preferred freedom from the responsibility I represented. Most painfully, I documented the slow realization that I had built my entire identity around being what they needed, rather than discovering who I might have become otherwise. Yet beneath the hurt and anger, my words also carried understanding. "I don't blame you for having these feelings," I'd written toward the end. "We can't control our emotions, only our actions. And your actions, whatever your private thoughts, were those of dedicated parents. You gave me stability, education, and love within your capacity. But I need to discover who Emma is outside of being your daughter, outside of compensating for the dreams you surrendered when I came into your lives. Maybe in separation, we can all find something that's been missing." As I placed my house key on the kitchen counter, a strange calm settled over me. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no heated accusations hurled across the dinner table, just the quiet dignity of removing myself from a dynamic that had stunted all of us in different ways. I took one final look around the home that had been my entire world for 28 years, then stepped outside, closing the door on the life I'd known. As I drove away, morning sunlight glinting off neighboring windows, the weight of performance, began lifting from my shoulders. Whatever came next would be terrifying, uncertain, and completely my own. The key to my new apartment felt foreign in my hand, its edges still sharp and unmarked by months of handling. My footsteps echoed against bare hardwood floors as I carried in my suitcases, the emptiness of the space both intimidating and exhilarating. This small one-bedroom unit, with its vanilla-colored walls and outdated kitchen, represented the first space that was entirely mine, chosen without consideration of anyone else's preferences or needs. I spent that first day in a flurry of practical activity, accepting deliveries of a hastily ordered bed frame and mattress, unpacking my limited belongings, and making lists of essentials still needed. The physical tasks kept the emotional overwhelm at bay, allowing me to focus on immediate problems rather than the seismic shift in my life's foundation. By evening, exhaustion hit like a physical wave. I sat cross-legged on my new mattress, eating takeout Chinese food directly from the container, when my phone began vibrating with incoming calls. Mom, Dad, Mom again. Text messages followed in rapid succession. Emma, where are you? Please. Call us immediately. We're worried sick. What is going on? I silenced the phone and continued eating methodically, each bite a small act of self-preservation. They had found the diary. They knew exactly where I was and why I had left. The urgent confusion in their messages suggested they hadn't expected consequences from their revelations, hadn't imagined their perfect daughter would ever step outside the role she'd played for 28 years. The calls continued through the night and into the next morning, growing increasingly demanding. I finally texted a brief response before my hospital shift. I'm safe. I need space. Please respect that. When I emerged from a 12-hour shift at the Children's Hospital, I found 17 missed calls and a voicemail from Dad that veered between anger and bewilderment. Emma Jean Clark, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but your mother is beside herself. Whatever you think you heard, you've clearly misunderstood. We expect you home tonight so we can sort this nonsense out. The authoritative tone, so familiar from my childhood, no longer carried the same weight. I deleted the message without responding and drove to the community center where I'd registered for a Wednesday night watercolor class. For 2 hours, I lost myself in the simple joy of watching pigment bloom across damp paper, creating something purely for the pleasure of creation. The instructor, an older woman named Gabriella with silver hair and paint-splattered jeans, paused behind my chair. You've done this before, she observed, studying my landscape. There's muscle memory in those brushstrokes. I looked up at her, surprised by the tears suddenly blurring my vision. A lifetime ago, I admitted. She squeezed my shoulder gently. Welcome back, then. Those 3 words followed me home, a benediction for the journey I'd begun. Days passed in a strange new rhythm. Hospital shifts, art classes, solo meals eaten while reading books I'd always meant to try, tentative conversations with neighbors in my apartment building. My parents' messages grew less frequent but more calculated, shifting from demands to guilt. Dad's blood pressure is concerning the doctor. The house feels so empty without you. We've always been a close family. What will people think? I maintained minimal contact, responding only to confirm my continued safety, refusing to be drawn into substantive discussions until I felt solid enough in my new reality to engage without being pulled back into old patterns. One unexpected connection emerged with my across-the-hall neighbor, Dorothy, a retired literature professor in her 70s. She caught me struggling with grocery bags one evening, insisting on helping despite her arthritic hands. Been watching You Coming and Going, she said matter-of-factly as she placed a bag on my counter. Young woman, all alone, working hospital shifts, reminded me of myself at your age. Something in her direct gaze, free of judgment or expectation, opened a door inside me. Before I knew it, we were sitting at my small kitchen table, sharing the lemon cookies she'd brought over, while the story of my departure poured out of me. Dorothy listened without interruption, her weathered hands cupped around her tea mug. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "Families are complicated ecosystems," she said. "Sometimes a plant needs different soil to truly flourish, even when there's love in the original garden." Her perspective, untangled from the emotional knots of my family history, offered clarity I desperately needed. Our impromptu conversation evolved into regular evening teas, Dorothy sharing stories of her own complicated journey from dutiful daughter to independent academic. In her, I found a model of a life lived authentically, despite the expectations of others. In late June, an unexpected email arrived from Boston Children's Hospital, responding to an application I'd submitted months earlier and then forgotten in the chaos of recent events. They were offering a specialized position combining pediatric nursing with art therapy for long-term patients, utilizing both my medical training and artistic background. The role would require relocating to Boston, a step that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. I sat with the opportunity for several days, discussing it with Dorothy and my hospital supervisor, who enthusiastically supported the potential career advancement. When I finally responded with interest, scheduling an interview for the following week, I felt another piece of my independent identity clicking into place. My brother Michael called during this period of transition, having heard fragmented versions of the situation from our parents. "They're completely blindsided, Emma," he said, his voice tinny through the international connection. "Dad says you're having some kind of breakdown." I laughed without humor. "Of course that's their interpretation. Heaven forbid they recognize I'm having a breakthrough instead." Michael was quiet for a moment. "You know, I always felt guilty for leaving while you stayed, like I was abandoning my post." "You were living your life," I responded, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. I was just very good at not living mine. Another pause, then. "For what it's worth, I think this is long overdue. And when you figure out who Emma is beyond being the perfect daughter, I'd really like to get to know her." His support, offered, without qualifications or pressure to reconcile with our parents, strengthened my resolve to continue on this uncertain path. In my small apartment that was gradually becoming home, with art supplies claiming the second-hand desk by the window and nursing textbooks sharing shelf space with novels I'd always wanted to read, I began assembling the components of a life guided by my own internal compass. The woman emerging from the shell of the perfect daughter was still taking shape, her edges undefined but increasingly authentic. There were moments of gut-wrenching doubt and loneliness, nights when I questioned every decision that had led me to this solitary existence. But with each day that I moved through the world on my own terms, the voice questioning my choices grew fainter, while the voice affirming my right to self-determination grew stronger. The knock came on a Sunday morning, exactly 1 week after I'd left. I was at my small kitchen table, sketching the view from my window while nursing a cup of coffee, when the sharp, insistent rapping echoed through my apartment. Something in the rhythm, 3 decisive knocks followed by 2 softer ones, instantly identified the visitors. Dad had knocked that way on my bedroom door throughout my childhood. My heart hammered against my ribs as I approached the door, pulse points throbbing. In my wrists and throat, through the peephole, I saw them standing awkwardly in the hallway. Mom clutching her purse with white-knuckled fingers. Dad's face set in the stern expression that had terrified me as a teenager. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home, avoiding this confrontation until I felt more prepared. But Dorothy's words from the previous evening came back to me. Avoidance only postpones the inevitable while giving it time to grow larger in your imagination. I unlocked the door and opened it, immediately struck by how my parents seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than the figures who had dominated my entire existence. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, the lines around her mouth deeper than I remembered. Dad looked older too, uncertainty softening his typically authoritative posture. "Emma," Mom whispered, her voice breaking on those 2 simple syllables. For several heartbeats, we stood frozen in tableau. The dutiful daughter and the parents who had both defined and confined her, separated now by more than just a threshold. Finally, I stepped back, wordlessly inviting them into my new space. They entered cautiously, gazes sweeping over the modest apartment with its minimal furnishings and the watercolor paintings already adorning the walls. Mom moved toward the largest one, a sunset over water rendered in bold oranges and purples. "You're painting again," she said softly, something like wonder in her voice. "I don't think I've seen your work since high school." The observation hung in the air between us, carrying unspoken questions about all she had missed, all I had suppressed. Dad remained standing rigidly by the door, hands thrust deep in his pockets. "We read your diary," he announced abruptly, his tone defensive rather than apologetic. "You had no right to just disappear like that. We've been worried sick." The familiar pattern of his speech, beginning with an accusation rather than addressing the underlying issue, suddenly seemed so transparent. This was how he had always maintained control of difficult conversations, putting others immediately on the defensive. But I wasn't the same Emma who would have rushed to apologize, to smooth things over at any cost. I gestured toward my small couch. "Why don't we sit down?" The three of us arranged ourselves awkwardly in my living area, parents on the couch, me in the single armchair across from them. The coffee table between us felt like a demilitarized zone. Mom broke the tense silence first. "Emma, we're trying to understand. That diary, the things you wrote?" She twisted her wedding ring anxiously. "You made it sound like we've been horrible parents, like we don't love you. How could you think that?" The genuine confusion in her voice confirmed what I'd slowly realized during my week away. They had no idea how their casual comments had revealed decades of underlying resentment, how thoroughly those revelations had shattered my understanding of our family dynamic. "I heard you at the anniversary party," I said quietly, "talking with the Harrisons and Bakers in the gazebo, about how having me derailed your lives, about how you regret it." Their faces registered shock, then recognition, then something like shame. Dad recovered first, slipping into justification mode. "You completely misunderstood the context of that conversation, Emma. We were reminiscing about life choices, that's all. Everyone has moments of wondering about roads not taken." "You said you regretted having me," I repeated, my voice steady, despite the pain constricting my chest. "Those were your exact words, Mom. There are days I regret it too. After spending my entire life trying to be worthy of you, trying to compensate for whatever I'd taken from you, hearing that confirmation was... I struggled to find words adequate to describe the collapse of my entire self-concept. It made everything clear." Mom began crying silently, tears tracking down her cheeks. "It wasn't about you, Emma. Not really. We were talking about timing, about being young parents before we were ready. Of course we don't regret you." "Then why did I grow up feeling like I had to earn my place in our family?" I asked, the question emerging from some deep, previously inaccessible part of me. Why did I spend 28 years trying to be perfect? Trying not to be a burden, giving up everything I wanted to make you happy? Dad leaned forward, running a hand through his thinning hair. "We never asked you to give up anything. The nursing career, staying in Connecticut, that was all your choice." The genuine bewilderment in his expression cracked something open between us. "Was it?" I challenged. "When I got that art scholarship, you made it clear what you thought about art as a career. When I was offered the Boston position, you talked about how empty the house would feel. You never directly asked, but you made your expectations perfectly clear." A heavy silence settled over us, broken only by Mom's quiet sniffling. When Dad spoke again, his voice carried a vulnerability I'd rarely heard. "My father told me I was throwing my life away when I chose accounting over law school," he said slowly. "He called it settling for mediocrity. I swore I'd never put that kind of pressure on my kids. He looked at me with dawning horror. I didn't realize I was doing exactly that to you, just in a different way. Mom wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. We had such difficult childhoods, Emma. My parents were so critical, never satisfied with anything I achieved. I promised myself I'd be different. She reached for my hand across the coffee table, but I wasn't ready for that connection yet. We thought we were being supportive, letting you know how proud we were when you succeeded. We never meant to make you feel like our love was conditional. As they continued speaking, a complex picture emerged of two people shaped by their own difficult upbringings, unconsciously creating patterns they had sworn to avoid. Dad described growing up with a father who valued prestige above all else, who had made his disappointment in Dad's safe career choices abundantly clear. Mom revealed more about her parents' coldness, their emphasis on achievement rather than happiness, the constant moving for her father's career that had left her perpetually starting over in new schools. When we found out we were expecting you, we were terrified of repeating those patterns, Mom explained. We wanted stability, security, everything we hadn't had. Maybe we overcorrected, became too focused on creating the perfect family environment. For the first time, I saw my parents not as the all-knowing authorities of my childhood, but as flawed individuals doing their best with the emotional tools they had. It didn't erase the hurt of their revelations or justify my years of self-suppression, but it offered context I hadn't previously considered. I need you to understand something, I said finally, meeting their gazes directly. I'm not leaving to punish you. I'm leaving because I need to discover who I am outside of being your daughter. I need to make choices based on my own desires, not on what I think will make you proud or happy. Dad started to interrupt, but Mom placed a restraining hand on his arm. For the first time in my life, I continued, I'm making decisions that aren't filtered through the lens of your approval. It's terrifying and exhilarating, and I need space to do that. I'm not cutting you out of my life, but our relationship needs to change. By the time they left 2 hours later, we had reached no neat resolution. The fractures in our family couldn't be repaired in a single conversation, but something had shifted in our understanding of each other. They had seen me stand in my truth, without backing down, perhaps the first time I had done so completely. And I had glimpsed the wounded children still influencing my parents' adult behaviors, complicating my simple narrative of their motivations. As I closed the door behind them, watching through the window as they walked slowly to their car, I felt the curious lightness that comes with speaking long-held truths. We had started the painful work of seeing each other clearly, a necessary first step toward whatever our relationship might become. 6 months after walking away from my childhood home, I stood at the window of my Boston apartment, watching early December snow dust the cityscape. The view was still novel enough to captivate me, historic brownstones contrasting with modern high-rises, the Charles River a silver ribbon in the distance, so different from the familiar suburban landscape of my Connecticut hometown. My apartment had taken shape around me, reflecting the person I was becoming rather than the one I'd left behind. Watercolor paintings and charcoal sketches adorned walls previously reserved for nursing credentials and family photographs. Art. Supplies claimed the corner desk where morning light was strongest, while medical journals shared bookshelf space with art history volumes and fiction I'd always meant to read. The transition hadn't been seamless. My first month at Boston Children's Hospital had been overwhelming. The specialized role combining pediatric nursing with art therapy for long-term patients pushing me beyond my comfort zone in ways both challenging and rewarding. I'd cried in bathroom stalls between sessions, questioning my qualifications and my right to reinvent myself so completely. But gradually, as young patients responded to the creative outlets I introduced, as colleagues sought my input on cases, a new professional confidence emerged to replace the competence built on people-pleasing that had characterized my previous career. My personal transformation proved even more complex. The first solo Thanksgiving had been particularly difficult. spent with a gathering of hospital colleagues rather than in the familiar routine of my parents' dining room. I'd called. Home that evening, the conversation stilted and careful, all of us navigating the new terrain of our relationship. Since the confrontation in my Connecticut apartment, communication with my parents had evolved into weekly phone calls, cautious and considerate in ways our previous interactions had never been. Mom had started sending small packages, local honey. From the farmer's market, newspaper clippings about Boston exhibitions she thought might interest me. Once even a set of professional watercolors with a note reading simply, "These made me think of you." Dad's attempts at connection came through brief, slightly awkward texts about mundane topics, weather updates, questions about the Red Sox, neighborhood news. Neither mentioned my return home or pressured me about visits, respecting the boundaries I'd established. In early October, an unexpected email arrived from my brother Michael, announcing his temporary assignment to a Boston engineering firm for a 3-month project. "Thought we might get that coffee we've been talking about for years," he wrote. "Face to face this time." Our first meeting in a cafe near Fenway Park had been tentative, both of us uncertain how to relate outside the family structure that had always defined our interactions. But after initial awkwardness, conversation flowed more naturally than either of us expected. "I always envied you," he confessed over his second espresso. "The golden child who could do no wrong, who always knew exactly how to make them happy." I nearly choked on my tea. "And I envied your freedom, your ability to just leave without carrying their expectations with you." We'd laughed then, recognizing the fundamental misconceptions that had shaped our sibling relationship. That coffee date became a weekly tradition. During his Boston stay, each conversation peeling back another layer of family history, re-examining childhood memories through adult perspectives. Michael had offered unexpected insight into our parents' reaction to my departure. "They're in therapy," he told me during one of our meetings, both individually and as a couple. "Dad actually called to ask if I experienced our childhood the same way you did." I nearly fell off my chair. The image of my stoic father willingly sitting in a therapist's office, examining his parenting, would have been unimaginable a year earlier. My own weekly therapy sessions had become essential to my healing process. Dr. Levine, with her calm demeanor and incisive questions, helped me navigate the complex emotions surrounding my family history and current transformation. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing," she reminded me during a particularly difficult session. "It means releasing the expectation that the past could have been different. It's something you do for yourself, not for them." In November, tentative plans formed for a Christmas visit to Connecticut, my first return to my parents' house since my departure. The arrangements came with clearly communicated boundaries. I would stay for 3 days, not a week. I would stay in a hotel rather than my old bedroom. We would focus on creating new memories rather than rehashing past hurts. The approaching visit produced anxiety dreams and late-night doubts, but also a quiet determination to continue the work of rebuilding our relationship on healthier foundations. On a snowy evening in early December, I attended my first gallery. Opening as a participating artist, my watercolor series Metamorphosis displayed alongside works by other emerging Boston painters. As I stood nervously beside my paintings, answering questions from attendees, a familiar figure approached through the crowd. Dorothy, my former neighbor, had made the journey from Connecticut despite the inclement weather. "Couldn't miss your debut," she said, embracing me warmly. "And look at these. They breathe, Emma. They have life." Through her, I learned neighborhood, news, the renovation of the park where I'd once played, the retirement of my favorite librarian, the continuing rhythms of the community that had been my entire world for 28 years. Before leaving, Dorothy pressed something into my hand, a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "Open it later," she instructed with a conspiratorial wink. That night, after the exhibition closed, I unwrapped her gift alone in my apartment. A leather-bound journal with handmade paper, the first page inscribed with a quote from Mary Oliver. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" The question resonated through me as I settled at my desk, opening the journal to its second blank page. I began writing not in diary form, but as a letter to my younger self, the dutiful daughter who had surrendered her dreams to earn love she already possessed. "You are enough," I wrote. "Your worth isn't measured by accomplishments or sacrifices. You deserve to take up space in this world without apology." As snow continued falling past my window, transforming the city into a quiet wonderland, I found myself reflecting on the circuitous path that had led me here. The hurt of my parents' careless words had initiated a painful but necessary awakening. In losing the identity I'd clutched so tightly, I was discovering the person beneath the performance, with all her messy authenticity, creative passion, and hard-won wisdom. The journey wasn't complete. Perhaps it never would be. There would be difficult conversations ahead, moments of backsliding into old patterns, the ongoing work of establishing and maintaining healthy boundaries. But sitting in my apartment, surrounded by evidence of my emerging self, I felt profound gratitude for the painful catalyst that had forced me to claim my one wild and precious life. As I prepare to share this story with you, I wonder how many of you have faced similar revelations or painful turning points that ultimately led to growth. Have you experienced the difficult but liberating process of setting boundaries with family? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to join me for more stories of healing and transformation. And remember, sometimes the most painful endings become the most necessary beginnings. Thank you for witnessing my journey.
Knowing that this girl was being controlled by someone using a slave ring, Rio removed the collar to free her, and she said that the person who ordered her to hunt her close to Rio was the noble boy who pushed Laura down. The brisk-skinned girl introduced herself as Latifah, and since she had nowhere to go right now, she begged to go with Rio. The two of them went together to the unexplored eastern land, and during an overnight camping, Rio had her mention Tokyo in her sleep. So, Rio knew that she was also the Japanese who were reincarnated into this world like him. They had headed straight for a huge oak tree to continue, and while taking a break in the middle of the road, Rio encountered a group of demi-humans. Seeing that Rio didn't show any hostility, the girl leader Sarah talked to him, but when they saw Latifah sleeping in the tent, they rushed to attack Rio because they thought he had kidnapped a person among their fellows. Rio alone couldn't resist all force, so he was quickly taken back to the demi-human village. And when Latifah regained consciousness, a misunderstanding would clear up. So, the village chef forced the demi-human girls to quickly apologize to him. The next day, Rio was invited by the village chefs to the meeting with them, and they were very grateful to Rio because he protected one of their kind, Latifah. Right after that, Rio was met by a female tree spirit as well as the people's god named Dairas, and she discovered a humanoid spirit like her residing inside of Rio. Then said that he was perfectly capable of using spirit art. Rio and Latifah have been prepared by the village chefs for a beautiful tree house, and Sarah's group will also live here to protect them. In the time that followed, Rio learned spiritual art and many other new things from the people of the village, and he was considered